16-inch pipe ran across the golf course, still there.
That's great. Is that the one that's in the museum now, too?
As part of it.
Part
yeah.
of it, yeah.
Yes.
Great.
Glenn Butler, downtown property owner.
Thanks, Glenn.
Kim Sloan, I work for all the cities and water districts that get their water out of the Clackamas.
Damon Maybe, long-time resident, secretary of the McLaughlin Neighborhood Association, coincidentally.
Great.
Craig Danielson, Danielson's Hilltop Mall.
And now you need to leave, or what time do you need to
7.
leave? 7 o'clock.
Sorry.
Okay, no, that's okay. Thank you
Thank
for coming.
John Lewis, Oregon City Public Works Director.
Leach Froman Goodrich, Public Works Project Engineer.
Eli DeBerry, Water Operations for Oregon City.
Wyatt Parno, Oregon City Finance Director.
Paul Ledger, Citizen.
All right, and I'm Libby Bard with Barney and Worth.
John Ghilarducci, FCS Group.
Great, and one more introduction.
Are you? I'm out of here.
Okay, but you can introduce yourself.
Kathy Griffin.
I think she takes care of everything and got the projector going. So with that, Alita, would you like to do a welcome?
Good evening, everyone. We want to welcome you to the third Water Rate Advisory Work Group meeting, and we thank you for being here with us this evening, and we are looking forward to a real productive meeting.
Thank you, Alita. So just a quick overview of what we'll be doing tonight. John here will give an overview of the new charter options. So basically go through what the options mean as far as impacts on rates and ability to do ongoing maintenance and capital improvement projects. I'm going to give you a little preview of the public opinion research results. We did a telephone poll this month, so we have some of the early results back, and I'm hoping you'll find that interesting. And then we're going to go right into a discussion. You have a couple of worksheets in front of you. We're going to kind of go through and systematically get some input from you guys that we can take back to the City Commission at their next meeting, which will be early next month. Yep. So basically, you're here again for us to get your advice for the City Commission. So with that, I'll turn it over to John.
You know how to do that? No, I can advance it, but it needs to go to the.
Yep, I can do that.
Okay. Okay. Well, as Libby mentioned, we have several alternatives, options, scenarios for you to consider that we will be discussing and asking for your input on later. The first one, which you should all be familiar with, assumes that the rate rollback does occur, and so this would in essence be no change to the current charter. There would be a rollback to 1994 level rates, which would be a major loss in revenue to the water utility. We've estimated about 27%. There's also a inability to issue debt without a public vote under the current charter, which Mayor may continue. The rollback would occur October 15th, 2014. And we've included some detail there about how we actually calculated the revenue loss. As I mentioned, about 27%. It would occur over part of fiscal year 2015 and part of fiscal year 2016. There's like an extra do this one.
Can you do it with that?
Yeah.
Okay, that'll be useful.
So more information about that scenario one, some of the details before we look at graphs, charts of what it looks like. This scenario, we're assuming that the rollback occurs to 1994 levels. We're also assuming that there have been 3% increases every year since 1994, which is provided for in the charter. So it's not back to 1994, it's back to 1994 plus 3% a year up to the current year. That still is a 27% loss of revenue to the water utility. And then we would assume that going forward, the utility or the city could only impose 3% increases in water rates annually without a public vote, as the charter provides for now. That would be, the bump back to 94 levels plus 3% per year would be about a $7.36 reduction in the average water bill. So different usages would see different declines, but basically that's what you'd be looking at as an order of magnitude. The city, without that revenue, would be unable to do virtually any capital. They could not replace aging pipes. They could not undertake any of the capital projects recommended in the adopted Water Master Plan, and would not be able to fully fund existing operations and maintenance services.
Quick question, the $7 reduction, that's monthly?
Yes, that's monthly.
Okay.
Thanks. So scenario one, in terms of a forecast through 2023, would look like this. The red line is revenue. You can see it go down in fiscal year 2015 and 16. That's the full impact of the rollback. And then with 3% increases assumed every year after that, you can see the city falls well short of its needs during that period. One of the important components to this discussion is the capital needs, I should say. There's the pipe replacement program, which should occur at a level of about $2.3 million per year, and then there are specific capital projects identified in the master plan. To the extent that the city has to forego pipe replacement and the capital projects in the master plan, that deferred capital liability accumulates, and that's what we're looking at here. By the year 2023, the city has not done needed capital construction to the tune of over $30 million. One of the things that that came up in the commission meeting a few weeks ago that we talked about at length there is one of the things that we're doing in our financial modeling is we're setting aside the $2.3 million per year for pipe replacement, but in order not to double up on the rates, we're allowing that money to be spent on the specific projects that are identified in the master plan. So we're not doubling up and saying there's the $2.3 million in pipe replacement and the master plan projects on top of that. Most of the master plan projects are replacement projects, so we're using that $2.3 million on those master plan projects and the pipe replacement. So, long story short, the reason that I'm even going off on that tangent is to tell you that if we looked at those additively, this picture would look a lot worse because we would be taking the $2.3 million in annual pipe replacement and then adding on top of it the Water Master Plan projects, which was essentially what was contemplated in the Water Master Plan. So this is about as good as it can get under scenario one, and that will be the same for each of the scenarios. The cumulative capital liability will be about as good as it can get.
So John, does that show how much work hasn't been done and what it costs, what it would cost to do that work? If you waited until 2023 to do it, it would be $32 million worth of work.
That's what you would not have done, between now and then, assuming that you could use the $2.3 million in pipe replacement money on the master plan project.
Okay.
So the cumulative liability is actually a little bit less than if you added those two things together, if that makes sense. And the cumulative liability would continue to go up at the 3% per year level because you can never get back on top of it at that level of annual increases.
At that, I mean, that's kind of an artificial 3%, isn't it? Because as you're not doing pipe replacement, pipe is going bad. And the more you don't do work, the more it goes bad. So it's really should be more of a, you know, a rising compounded interest kind of curve rather than a flat rate, because even if you are doing capital improvements, you're not catching up to it. I mean,
That's a really good point. We were talking about that a little bit before the meeting. There's not room to handle emergency pipe replacements, pipe failures, except at the level that the city is doing that now. So you would expect, because you have an aging system, that the number of failures is going to increase over the next 10 or 20 years, and that you would need more and more funding in order to address those needs.
and
Absolutely.
whether those failures are pipes bursting or corroding up so much they can't produce the pressure needed at hydrants or whatever, those are both failures of the system.
Yeah, so we didn't even contemplate that. We just had to go with the straight line in our numbers. So scenario one, again, this shows what the average bills would do during that same forecast period. So the current average bill is about $32.41 with the rollback, and then assuming the 3% increases per year, you wouldn't reach that level again until fiscal year 2023. So scenario two assumes that there would be a charter amendment of some kind that would avoid the rollback. So what scenario two says is there would still be a limit of 3% rate increases per year unless you had voter approval, but it would not roll back to the 1994 levels plus the 3%, et cetera. So this would be about $1 a month to the average bill, and you'll see that goes up over time, but just to give you an order of magnitude, that's what a 3% annual increase would be to the current average monthly bill.
Is at the end of 5 years.
The dollar would be as of the end of I think it's the first year, isn't it?
3% onto $30 is not a dollar.
Well, we're at 32 now, so right, it's a little less than $1, 97 cents. Yeah. So this is what that scenario looks like. Again, the city is unable to address most of its capital needs until the Public Works Center is paid off in 2021. The cumulative capital liability here, about $22 million. Again, the capital liability continues to accumulate, even with the 3% rate cap. And as I mentioned earlier, we're assuming the double use for the $2.3 million, or this picture would look worse. So we'll look at the average bills too on scenario two. $32.41, so it goes up 97 cents, $1 to 2015, and then by 2023 it's up $1.27. So you can see, and we'll look at bills for some of your peer communities, and you'll see even at 43.56 you're still not near the top of the average bills for rates of your neighboring communities. I mean, some you would be, but some not. Scenario three, basically the same scenario as scenario two, except with an increased annual cap of 5% per year. So again, this would require a charter amendment to avoid the rollback and then impose a 5% ceiling instead of the current 3%. So we would assume water rates are maintained at the current level, no rollback, and then increased at 5% per year in order to make headway on the capital needs. That one, right after 5 years, you'd see $1.79 on the average bill. One thing you'll note is that in 2023, revenue exceeds the needs that we know of right now. So you'll see in the cumulative graph, things start to flatten out a little bit although they do continue to accumulate because we've put off some of our pipe replacement in order to do the water master plan projects. But you'll see in the early years, unable to meet capital needs, and in the out years, you do begin to make some headway against capital without necessarily addressing or eliminating the cumulative deficiency. So cumulative deficiency there about 14 million in 2023.
Okay. I got a problem with this graph and the previous one. In that if
The 3% one?
no, the previous slide. If you've got this gap below the red line, and it's potentially going to keep going, wouldn't there be a decrease in the next slide? A decrease in the blue line? Shouldn't it have, that the blue line in 2023 at the very least have dropped by that gap between the red and blue?
Yeah,
and wouldn't it continue to drop till it's eventually gone?
It would without the addition. We haven't pulled in the future capital. There were some future capital projects that were identified in the Water Master Plan. Most of those are SDC funded. We know there are going to be other needs. But yes, you're right. To the extent that you take that gap and spend it on capital, the cumulative deficiency would go down in that year. We didn't look out farther.
At the very least, though, if you're going to keep comparing apples and apples, that chart should dip.
23 should dip. Fair enough. Yeah. We took the overage and we didn't necessarily in the model apply it to capital, and we should have to do that. Okay. You'll see the same thing in
The next one.
the next.
in
Yeah,
concept.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I think we got it. We got it in the 8% scenario. So the average bills you'll see here go from the 3241 currently to in fiscal year 2023, almost $53 a month for an average single-family residential. You'll see in the comparisons that compares favorably even now to some neighboring monthly bills. So one of the things that we wanted to take a look at, and this came up at the commission meeting as well, and at previous advisory group meetings, the idea of trying to use debt for some of the capital needs of the city. And one of the issues that we've talked about internally is, and that I've advised against doing, is using debt for pipe replacement. Pipe replacement is an annual ongoing need and doesn't really fit what you would use a debt issue for. A debt issue is better used for single capital projects where you want to take the cost. They're going to last a long time, and you want to take that cost and spread it out over a period of 20 plus years. So the Public Works Center does fit that description. It's a need that the city has. And so we thought we would look at, instead of setting aside a cash amount every year as water's share of the Public Works Center, what if we debt finance that? And so scenario 3A is the same as scenario 3 with a 5% ceiling, except we debt finance the Public Works Center. And after all that, it really doesn't change the picture that much. You'll see the purple. You see the purple sliver in there. That it's there in 2013, 14, and 15. In those 3 years, it represents the existing debt service. But from 2016 on, that would be debt service on the Public Works Center, and it would go on until 2033. But it only saves the city about $1 million on the cumulative deficiency, so it didn't seem to be a real good fit. We wanted to look at it in this case because the city has done a lot to set money aside for the Public Works Center already. So we would just be debt financing what was left. No problem.
One one question about this, John, is, so in 14 and 15, those are obviously larger purple gaps, right? That's because we still have debt to pay off in 14 and 15, right? So
That's the combined debt service of the existing loan that will be paid off in fiscal year 2015 and the new debt service for the Public Works Center.
So, and this assumes that we were to try to get that funding in which year? Let's say we were trying to actually
Fiscal year
finance-
2014.
Fiscal year 2014. If we chose, I mean, just thinking about workload and everything else, the likelihood of being able to do something in 2014 is
Putting it out.
Just trying to get permits that fast.
Yeah, if we push that out to, say, 2016 or 17, then whatever is in purple, with the exception of the little sliver kind of that's shown in 13, so we might improve a little bit there too, right? So I'll get a few years.
That's a
and
good
then
point, yeah.
Push that out. So in the next slide, which I know is coming, might make that number look even a little bit better. Maybe another million or so that could come
because
out.
we're looking at, well, that's probably, and I'm just eyeballing it, but it's close to $500,000 a year in debt service. So if you delayed it 2 or 3 years, I mean, that's basically $500,000 per year that you would add to, you would be able to use on other capital.
Okay.
Yeah.
While we're talking about bonding or bonded debt, I think it would be interesting, and I know a lot of people have asked about this. What would be? We're looking at today's money. We're looking at opportunities to fix our infrastructure today at a lower cost than it will be in 10 years from now. Does it not make sense to consider that and look at our master plan and look at our needs for the next 10 years or the length of the master plan and see what that bonded indebtedness would be on a general obligation bond and see how that affected the ratepayers and come and have that as a scenario as well and say, well, if we do get a bond and we can go fix what we need to fix today at today's costs, there's people looking for work. I mean, we could do some things today that we don't, and I know you said we're only looking at $2 million a year to put into this, but why not? I mean, we have some areas that may not make it 10 years out, and I just think it's something that we ought to maybe consider and look at the long term and see how that would affect the ratepayers to take that debt now and fix the infrastructure today and move forward that way. It'd be something I think it'd be interesting to look at and at least give the ratepayers the knowledge that we looked at that.
So, would your suggestion be to do that for sort of as much of the pipe replacement as possible and bundle that in one, or try and take some of the specific capital projects and maybe move them up and do them sooner? You could approach that.
I would move it up sooner. I mean, we're looking at
there's a major reservoir improvement that you could do earlier rather than
exactly, later. And I mean, there's opportunities for job creation. There's opportunities for lower cost on money, perhaps. I mean, those are things that I think we could look at. I mean, what's money going to cost us in 2014 or 2015 to get
next year.
Or next year. I mean, if we have an opportunity to look at that today, I think we should. I think we owe it to ourselves to look at it and see if it makes sense. And there's some project improvements I know that could probably be done sooner than later and would probably be better off. And John could tell you that. I don't know our system as well as he does, but it seems to me that I live in the McLaughlin neighborhood, and I know that there's some old pipes down there that could probably be used and repaired and get that taken care of sooner than later.
You're just trying to get us in trouble with all the neighborhoods with all the construction that would be going on.
Well,
just my neighborhood.
Just your neighborhood.
Everybody's numb now, so you might as well just take advantage of the Novocaine and keep going.
Well, I mean, does it make sense? I'm not suggesting that it is the right thing to do. I think we owe it to ourselves to look at it and to see and for you to come back and say, well, here you are with the ratepayers. You can hold back on 5% and be limited to 5% per year. Or if we do this bonding now, get everything fixed, then you're going to pay 6% per year. It's going to affect you, but we're going to be better off today than we will be 15 years from now. Does it make sense?
And it's a heck of a way to slow down traffic on High Street with a big trench right down the middle of it.
Exactly. We kill two birds with one stone there.
Yeah. Don't need speed bumps. Got a trench.
So our fourth scenario would increase the annual ceiling to 8%. And if you're looking at the whole picture, at least in my view, this is the one that works, given the needs we have identified in the master plan and for pipe replacement and specific capital. So this would assume rates stay at the current level without a rollback, and then the city would have the ability to go up to 8% without a public vote. If the city were to do that every year for the next 5 years, that would be an increase in the average bill of a little over $3.
Question? That said $3 annually. Everything else said monthly.
It's
so
monthly.
Is the
It's
slide
monthly.
correct or incorrect?
Or are you going to make me say the slide is incorrect?
Yes.
The
I
slide
just want it on the
incorrect. It is.
record.
Yeah, the slide is incorrect.
Okay.
It is monthly.
I'll give you $30 right now and just leave me alone.
Yeah, sorry about that. So at the 8% level, and you see this presumes that rate increases would continue. The reason is because you're then able to address some of the capital that you deferred in the early years, which we haven't added back in except to show you that it's there at the beginning. That would also be there to address future capital needs. The cumulative deficiency does as you would expect in this one, and as revenue exceeds capital in those out years, begins to address the cumulative deficiency. The deficiency would be gone by 2024. Presumably then you could at least cease rate increases for a time, depending on what future capital needs there were. You would obviously fit them to the needs at the time. The deferred capital liability at the end of 2023, just because that's what we've looked at in all the other scenarios, would only be $2 million, having peaked at about $7 million in 2018 and 19.
Did you look at scenario 1 with taking the public works funding out, and scenario 2? Did you happen to look at those two to see?
Taking the public works, the center
fund-
out, the public works center
funding
out?
Yeah.
We didn't look at that specifically. That would be a discontinuing the city's current practice of setting some money aside for the public works center. You could obviously do that. We were already doing so much sort of bundling with the 2.3 million that we didn't look at that, but that is something we could look at.
What are the rate impacts on?
Well, look at it and present it are two different things. I think we've looked at that in the sense that we recognize that there's this concern about a public works facility being funded, and we've talked a lot about it in terms of presenting it. Do we or don't we value the infrastructure needed to kind of keep day-to-day business going? Our position has been, we still value that. We still recognize that there's a need for a public works facility. And so through all the scenarios that we've presented, we've always shown that in there. But we have considered that. It's just we've kind of come back to the conclusion, do we want to invest in equipment, or should we take equipment out? Well, no, we need equipment. Do we want to invest in facilities? Yeah, we need facilities. We're not necessarily proposing Taj Mahal, but we're presenting what we think are reasonable and responsible numbers for facilities as well, right? So.
Right. But I think selling this, I mean, you've got to be able to literally sell this. And I think to be able to do that, you probably should have those numbers. Now, you probably do. You just didn't present it.
Right.
It's fine. As long as you've looked at it, I think we've got to be able to, because people out there are saying, well, it's a slush fund. And you know, it's not a slush fund. There's a reason for it. It's in the bank. It's making money. It's there. It could be used, but you're going to have people say, well, why should I pay 3% more when there's this money that's being used, and we're no closer to getting a public works facility than we were 10 years ago. I mean, you have to be able to answer that question. And so if we looked at that and said, well, you know, if we kept it we allow this rollback to go and we take that 3% just as it's written, and we don't put any more money towards public works, here's what could happen, and then say, but we need a public works facility, so how do we get that? Do we go out and get a bond? And that's the discussion I think we have to have in this community, because with what's been going on with all the other things that have been going on lately, I think people want to hear, they want to know the facts, and I think we have to be upfront and say, yeah, we did look at it, and here's what we believe it is. And I mean, to Mr. Danielson's question, you know, back a couple of meetings ago, have we looked at the expenses, and is that an expense that we should consider and be open and honest with it and bring it out to the public? But I think that's something that's going to come up, and I'd like to be prepared for it.
Just for your own background, and we can still provide and should provide the numbers. What that would essentially do is it would make that cumulative deferred capital liability a better picture. There would be, because you could do more with the increases that we programmed in on the pipe replacement and on the master plan projects. So that's where it would have its impact, and we'll show.
And that would make sense. But you know, I think it's something that I think it's something we need to be prepared to talk about.
Yeah. So when I look at those deferred slides, John, we show the difference in the capital colors. Well, the one before that. So we show the operations center there in the light blue, right? The next one in the deferred slide. Well, that one doesn't reflect it very well because it drops. But the previous scenario, the other scenarios, is there an opportunity to show the light blue in this one as well? What that would?
Sure.
Yeah, I mean,
show it as a
salesman, putting the light blue on top, and then putting it, you know, on this graph on top. I mean, it makes it's much sellable thing, because right now, if I was Joe Public and I looked at this, I went, you're telling me that there's a capital problem, we can't even replace our pipes, but you're still going to build a building that we don't really need because we already have a building. And I understand, I've been in the building, I've been through the door that's this high, I know that. So, but I'm just, you know, being Joe Public on this, and my neighbor who freaks out about, you know, a 30-cent change and goes and reads his own water meter to make sure that you haven't, you know, screwed him. You know, he's going to look at it and go, you know, wait a minute, you know, you having a desk is not nearly as important as me turning on my tap and getting water.
Oh.
I don't care about your desk.
One thing I thought we could do right now is I could show you, we did a telephone poll, and you guys might be interested to see what what your community thinks about these different scenarios. We're ready to move on?
But real quick, can you go back to this chart for scenario 1? I want to look at something. I don't know if my eyes caught what I... Did you see? Okay. All right, that's fine. I just, for some reason, imagined that the blue had stopped in like 2017 on that chart and kept going on the others. I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. Okay, thanks.
All right, so we recently completed a telephone survey of 200 residents. It was done by DHM Research, Adam Davis and John Horvick did the work. They're public opinion research experts in Oregon. They're really great to work with. But these are just the preliminary results. They haven't done the further research down into the numbers. That will be completed November 5th. So this is just the first cut of the data. And it starts out with some good news for Oregon City, which is that customers are satisfied with the service and they rate the quality of their drinking water as good. So it's a good place to start from, not from where you have customers who are unhappy with their water and don't appreciate their service. So you can see it's 75% rate on the quality of their drinking water is excellent or good, and 86% are satisfied with their drinking water service. So those are great numbers for an organization and a great place to start if you're going to go out and start talking to your customers.
Which also means why we have to sell. Nothing's wrong. Why do we need to
Well,
do
here,
that?
this is real. I'll show you the next slide, which is even more, this is exactly to your point, Damon, which is, this is the lowest level of understanding that I have ever seen in a survey about people's water system. So it's, what's the source of your drinking water? 50% just flatly said, I don't know. Usually people guess and say Bull Run, but 37% said Clackamas River, but 50 don't know. When we asked them if they're aware of any issues or problems with the water system, 85% said, no, I'm not aware of any problem.
That's the same 85 that said their water service is great.
Yeah, you're right. This is, I mean, I think this goes to the point about the need to get out and educate people about what the problems are with the water system. And especially the next question, we said, hey, are you aware of this charter amendment? And they said, 83% said, not at all aware. So you're starting from a place, basically you could say that nobody knows nothing about the water or the issues that are Oregon City's community is facing. When we tested we asked a series of questions about water rates, water issues, and then we tested the scenarios that John just went through. And one thing we found that was interesting was that water rates not appear to be an issue. If you ask them about their water system, rates never come up. So there's not a rate crisis going on where people, other than generally unhappy about taxes, nobody said anything about their water rates. The no amendment option is completely unacceptable to 2/3 of the respondents. So 60% of them said they were opposed to doing nothing, which is it's really a great number if you think about it. On a telephone poll, we explain the charter amendment. We only have 45 seconds to do it. So with that little amount of information, they said that it's unacceptable that Oregon City can't let the water rates roll back to 1994 levels. So that was good. Also, the surprising is that you would think that the higher rate increases would not have garnered as much support, but the 5% and the 8% cap options were both the highest ranked amendment options. And in fact, on the 8% cap, which enjoyed 56% support, when we asked them to rate all four, which one do you like the best, they said 8%. And I believe that goes back to what John was talking about when he said when he was describing the 8% cap. That is the solution that actually solves the problem. So, and again, with very limited information, that is what your community said about these options. On the other hand, the 8% cap also, if you asked people which was the option they liked the least, it was also the 8% cap. So you can see it's a kind of because it's the highest percent increase that we asked them. So you can see that still there's some people who don't, the 33% who support the rollback are also not happy about an 8% cap. But again, the 5 and the 8 enjoyed support from the community for fixing pipes and investing in infrastructure. And again, these are just the preliminary analysis. The DHM research will go in and do a lot more look at the data, and that report will be available for is it the November 8th, 7th
13th.
November 13th. November 13th.
City Commission meeting. So are there any questions or observations about
How many
this?
do they have what was the quantity of people they talked with?
It was 200.
200.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
It was a statistically valid telephone survey. Yeah.
Ratepayers or taxpayers?
All customers of Oregon City. So ratepayers, I believe.
Businesses.
No, that's not right. No, it's citizens. It was
Okay, so
citizens. Yes,
it's
thank
not-
you. Sorry, Craig.
It could be 10% of the volume.
Could be. Oh, I should also say that this exact same survey is online right now, and Oregon City has been advertising it, and that is going out to businesses. It's anybody who does business, owns a business, or lives in Oregon City, or so that we will be able to. That will be interesting to see how the results of the online survey may be different from the telephone survey that was residents.
So I'm still, so was the phone survey to citizens?
Residents,
So
yeah.
they might not be even a water payer.
They would be a ratepayer that lives in Oregon City.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, yeah. There's a tiny bit of Oregon City that's served by another.
That's okay.
Yeah, they weren't surveyed.
Hey, Libby.
Yes, John.
Can you, these surveys, for anybody that stays at home and answers these kind of phone calls, they're pretty unbiased. I read some of the questions. I think it'd be good to explain that, because I just want to make sure it's clear to everybody that there's no leading questions in the survey. It's all, this is very unbiased kind of results.
Right, that's there are no what you would call push questions here, where it's very unbiased, and when you see the final report, you'll be able to see the questions that were asked.
Well, and I guess the problem I have with it is the 5 and 8% questions, because I was one of the people called.
Oh, great.
So yes, I knew we got.
So you were one of the
River
people who knew.
yeah.
Thank you. You're one of the
But
36%.
When they were reading the question, and I looked at the online one, I didn't do it because I'd already done the verbal one, but it made more sense reading it, because when the person was telling me, it's like, with the 5% option, we'd meet our capital needs and meet our needs in 4 years, is what I heard. And then the 8% is, we'd meet our capital needs and we'd meet our needs in 10 years. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. Why at 5% would we meet it at 4 years, and at 8% we'd meet it in 10 years? And I was like, so that might have created a bias on the 5-8 question also, because rolling
That's good
back
to know.
through the questions, I'm like, oh, wait a minute, 4 years or 8 years or 10 years? I'll go for the 4-year option. So. And
That doesn't jive with the language that I read from their script.
when you read
from their script.
Well, I'm just saying, when the person was reading their script to me, that's what I heard. Whether and I looked at. Effectively, the script is the questions online, and it made sense when I read it online. Although I already had that fog in my mind, so I flipped back and forth. Okay, that's the difference. So.
Well, I think we'll learn more as DHM does the analysis. So these are really just the highlights, that the 5 and the 8% both have support.
Yeah, it's good. It's better than the no amendment. No.
Yeah,
I want to save $7.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And have brown water coming out of my faucets. And
That's right. So with that,
what you need to do is you need to find out people who've moved from the Midwest, and then survey them, because
That's
they'll be
right.
like, "You've got the best water in the world, and I can't believe that it's like white when it comes out of my thing, and I don't have to wash my stuff to wash my stuff."
That's right. I did a open house in Hillsborough last night, and the people, 75% of the people were brand new to Hillsborough, from Arizona and California and places that have no water. And they said, we're here because we want to make sure that there's water here. So you're exactly right. What I wanted to do now, because this is our third meeting, and we've had some conversations, and we've talked through the issues, and I thought what we'd do, if it's okay with you guys tonight, is just go through and in a little more detail some of these things we've been talking about, like the new city charter amendment objectives. These were created with help from you guys over the last couple meetings, with input from staff and others. The city council looked at it, and what we'd like to do is, I'm curious about these objectives. You have a worksheet in front of you. If it helps you think through this, let me see. I think our stuff got. Sorry about that.
Here's a copy.
Thanks, John.
Do they have them in front of them? There's a stack here.
So this one in front of you. I know maybe all of these are important to you, but I'd like you to take just a minute and read through them. And I'm curious about which ones of these, if you just had to pick three, like those three are my top priorities for objectives for forming the new charter amendment.
Real quick,
Damon,
does our guest in the audience who just came in have a copy of this? Was it part of the? Okay, because No, we got.
And
extras.
I'm not going to fill it out anyway, so I've made it.
I just wanted
sure.
you're craning your neck to read the chart, which is this piece of paper. So I want to make sure you got that.
Would you like to introduce yourself?
Tom O'Brien.
Thank you for coming. And again, while you're thinking about these is your top three. They might all be important, but if I said you can take three of these home with you, which three would you take? And if you're ready, if you have them, I'll take them.
Number 5 and number 7.
2, 5, 7. Thank you, Greg. You want to say a little bit? So maintain service, accountability over future increases, and good prospects for voter approval. Thank you. Anybody like to say something about those? Nope. Easy enough. Anybody else ready? Tim?
2, 1. Let's see. I'm sorry. 1, 2. Yes, 2, 1, and 5.
2, 1, and 5. Okay, so that's replace the amendment, maintain service, and accountability over future. Accountability over future increases. Kim, are you ready?
Yep. I
Okay.
had 1, 2, and 3.
1, 2, and 3. Okay. So replace them in the amendment, maintain service, and invest in capital improvements. I know it's kind of hard. Some of them are. Damon?
2, 5, and 7.
2, 5, and 7. So that's maintain service, accountability, and good prospects for voter approval. That's interesting. So you have to make sure that whatever is proposed has a likely chance of passing, or it
Yeah,
won't.
I mean, I kind of include 1, but
One
if
and
you do
7
7, you're doing 1. So
I get that. So these two are kind of the same.
they're linked.
1
They're
and 7
linked.
are together, really.
Yeah. Yeah. Good point.
And kind of 8, but it's all about the amendment.
Amendment. Yeah. Glenn?
2, 5, and 7, and 7 being also including 1.
Okay.
It's a combination.
Yeah, if everybody's okay with that, I will just put these two. I'll put these two together. Okay. So 2, 5, and 7. So accountability and maintain service. Rose?
Number 1 is number 2 for me, but so 2.
So number 2?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But clarification on the intention of the language in number 3 and number 4.
So number 3 is retain the capacity to invest timely in capital improvements to the community's water system. And what was the other one?
Number 4, to
Preserve Oregon City's access to lowest possible borrowing costs by limiting risk to lenders. You want to take a shot at that?
Well, the way
John?
I read both of those, they have to do with removing the ceiling altogether. And probably they both do, because that provides the city the most flexibility to deal with capital needs in a timely manner, the ability to raise rates as needed. And then likewise, that would provide the lowest risk to creditors would be if the city can raise rates as needed to repay debt.
Would a higher cap also
Higher cap would help,
would
yes.
help towards that goal?
Yeah,
Okay.
so higher or no cap, I guess.
so they're both saying rather the same thing? One's preserve and one's retain?
I read the result, one has to do with the bond market, and the other has to do with flexibility on the city's part to raise rates to meet emergencies. They have the same ultimate result would be the highest or no cap on the rate increases on an annual basis, but different reasons for doing so.
I think we can look at actually trying to put this together where they're clearer. So thank you for that input. Would you vote on one of these then if that?
I think I would go for number 4,
Okay.
today's dollars,
Okay.
and number 7.
Number 7. Okay. Well, interesting. So, John, you'll be happy to know that maintain service and replace the amendment. Look, if you put those two together, look like those two are kind of top priorities, along with accountability over future rate increases. So, is that kind of
Well, that's why there was a charter amendment to begin with, was
Right,
accountability of future. So,
So having all these objectives in mind, if you turn to your next worksheet, and here, what I'd like, and this is going to be more complicated, I understand, but what we'd like to do is get an idea from you guys which one of these options enjoys your support the most. So just like we asked customers, thank you, John. Just like we asked customers on the telephone poll, and Damon, you've already taken the poll, but I'd be interested to see where this group, if there's any consensus at all between these options. Craig, are you already ready?
Yeah. So
Okay, hold on. What could you start? I was going
3,
to.
no amendment. 3.
That's your number one.
no.
Number 3 for me is no amendment. How do you want me to give you my numbers?
Well, I was going to say, what's your top choice?
A top
Your
choice.
number one. That's
3% cap.
3% cap. Okay, so there's one.
5% cap is number 2.
Okay.
No amendment is number 3.
Okay.
And 8% cap is number 4.
Okay. So for you, the 8% cap. Anything else but an 8% cap. Is that right? It's your fourth
Those
option?
are my orders, because
The orders,
everything
right.
else could be no cap, and I think there needs to be a cap. It's not on the chart.
Oh, okay. I get it. Okay. Thank you for that. So you think there needs to be a cap. Okay. Damon?
Number 1, 5%.
Okay.
2, 8%.
2, 8%. Okay.
3, 3%.
3 is 3%. Okay.
And that leaves number 4, no amendment.
Okay. All right. Anybody else ready? Kim?
So, let's see. So I can't remember how you're doing it. So my
So number 1, what's your number? Which one of these is your favorite?
favorite being the top number, right?
Yes.
1.
And 1. Okay, so I'm still confused.
Well, if you like the 5% most, I would put a check
Okay,
mark
so
in number 1.
First is 8%, 5%, 3%, and then no amendment.
No, so you're just working up the line.
8%,
Yeah.
5%,
Exactly.
3%. Okay.
I'm the same, 8, 5, 3. No.
8, 5, 3, no. Okay.
I'm the same.
Really? Okay.
8, 5, 3,
8,
no.
5, 3, nope. Tim?
Well, I'm not a real fan of charter amendments to begin with. So
know.
I don't like the idea, quite frankly, of even doing a charter amendment. I think that's what got us here in the first place, and I think the unintended consequences are 20 years later, here we are.
Right.
So that's, if I have, my choice would be general obligation bonds initially, but if these are my choices, I would say.
Well, I'll write that down. So would you be for getting rid of the charter amendment altogether?
Or
go around it by just going to a GO bond? Or
well, I don't want to say go around it. I would say what I would do is, if we take it as written, we're limiting ourselves. So we would have to come up with another plan, and that other plan would have to be a GO bond. There is no other option, in my mind. So, but if the commission decides that they want to move forward with this amendment, then my goal would be, and I think the most sellable is 5%. So mine would be 5.
Okay.
And I'm looking at this as selling this, then 3, then 8, then 0, then no amendment.
Okay.
I need to, can you explain that one more time? I want to get your I'm not understanding. Your preference is not to amend the charter.
Correct.
Whether you agree with the charter or not. You just think charter amendments don't work.
Well, we've seen that they don't work, and we've seen it more than once. And I don't like charter amendments. Never have. I think anytime you change the charter, you get those unintended consequences. And here we are sitting at this meeting talking about it for the last 4 meetings. So that's the problem. And so I'd rather not get into that situation. If we're going to have to go to the ratepayers and sell them something, I would rather go to the ratepayers and sell them on the fact that here is our plan, here is what we need the money for, and here is how much we need. That's where I'd rather sell. I'd rather look at your master plan.
I just want to clarify. So the GO bond means that a general obligation bond to pay for the improvements as opposed to a revenue bond. So a GO bond, are they always paid for by property tax, or can you pay?
They're secured by property taxes, but you can pay them by rate revenue.
Okay, so that's what you meant. So secure them by property tax, pay for them through revenue.
I agree 100% with what Tim said.
Okay.
If the bond is an option, that should be number one.
And I agree with both of them.
I do too.
Can I ask a clarifying question
please,
too? If there was an option up there that said revoke the charter amendment,
Hands down.
is that what you're saying too, Tim? That would be the option you would choose, would be to revoke the charter amendment?
That would be my choice.
That would be my choice.
It would not be your choice.
Well,
Is everybody nodding?
if we do a bond, then yes, get rid of the charter amendment. I'd compromise and agree with that. It's getting the bond.
That's
and
the
spending the money up front to repair the pipes that have deteriorated over 100 years.
Now, I think there is some clarification to this, a GO bond that revenue paid for. You would still have to go, if the charter was not eliminated, the charter amendment, then you couldn't do that, right? Because you wouldn't have the revenue to pay back the GO bond. If it was,
you can do a GO bond virtually any time as long as you can pass the public vote. You wouldn't have the rates to repay it. You'd have to end up paying for it out of property taxes. But that's what you vote on when you vote for a GO bond. You vote to raise your taxes as needed to repay that debt. So yeah, I was just a little unclear, and it's maybe you all are a little bit different on which chicken or the egg. If the debt is the most important, the bond issue is the most important thing, or if the bond issue makes sense, if you would choose to revoke the charter first or issue the bond first. I mean, I wasn't clear about that.
I don't understand.
One's contingent on the other in your
Craig,
case.
For you, Craig, I'm just going to summarize. I think what you're saying is if it was possible to revoke the charter amendment, and then you said go to a vote for a GO bond, that's acceptable to you.
Correct.
Eliminating the charter and then not having a vote about how the improvements are paid, you're not for that.
Correct. There needs to
There
be
needs to
money
be
put to the voters to do the improvements, and as been discussed earlier, it seems to me that it's cheaper to do it today, and you should take a big chunk and get it repaired and replaced.
Yeah, I'd rather get punched in the face once than
So
death
who
of a
on this,
thousand cuts.
could I just see a show of hands for people who, that follow, does that make sense?
Mhm.
And then how
That's what
many
Tim
people?
said.
So 1, 2, 3. Kim?
Somewhat undecided.
Okay. All right. That's interesting.
My feeling is when I went 853 and the last one is I like the 8%. I like the last part of the GEO, but I rather think that where we're going to end up is with the 5%. That I'd rather see more money put into it and do it now,
Right.
because we're going to need it.
Well, I think it's interesting to me when I look at this chart that it matches very well with the telephone survey that we did, where you can see the 8% cap kind of enjoys some, because it actually solves the problem, it enjoys support, but it also has more kind of less support as well, where the 5%, it has support and doesn't really have a lot of kind of opposition to it. And it's interesting that's kind of matches up with what we saw on the telephone poll. But more importantly, I think, is this this bit of it, where if these were your only choices, this is how it would look. But you'd also like the council to think about something like this that eliminates the charter but allows for CIP projects to be funded through a GEO bond, a vote of the people.
Right, and what this gives you is you're limited to 3% for the old amendment. You're limited to that 3%. That's all you're going to have, and that 3% will go your increase in rates. But talk about accountability. You as a property owner have just voted to get a general obligation bond to do the projects. There's no hidden money there. I mean, it's you voted to get this bond to get it fixed, and you're limiting, and you still are limiting your 3% for rates.
John and Alita, do you have any questions, clarifying questions?
I have a clarifying question.
Okay, Damon.
How can you say revoke the amendment and then say there's a 3% cap?
You're right. Sorry,
You wouldn't have a cap.
you wouldn't have a cap.
You would no longer have that.
And you know, that's the thing that scares the ratepayers. But I think going back and being able to point to, look, we didn't even raise rates on some years. You know, we've been fiscally responsible. That's what you warned us to do, or else. You know, and we've already proven we can recall politicians that we don't like doing what they're doing. So the word is out that, you know, be responsible, be able to explain your actions, or face the consequences.
Right. Yeah.
So I
misstated
do, and I know Craig has to leave, so I just want to make sure I've got this in my head. So get rid of the rollback, get rid of the whole charter, which includes
the amendment, not the charter.
Charter amendment. Get rid of the charter amendment, the 1996 charter amendment. So we don't have a rollback at that point, and we also don't have a cap. And you think that would be sellable to the public?
Well,
that's the only question that's going to be asked in May.
The other part of it is that you would go to a vote of the people to borrow the money to do the project, just like you would a fire
I get that
station.
piece, but when we vote in November, we're not going to be voting on the GEO bonds, right? Or if we did, that'd be a separate item, right? So in May, we're asking them to revoke the charter amendment. And do we think that's going to pass? That's kind of a question, because some would say, well, then you're going to raise my rates, and you know, we've as a group have collectively agreed that, or I don't know that we've collectively agreed.
Well,
I'm not sure about the GEO bonds, but we're basically saying instead of paying for those needs using water rates, this group is saying rather than raise rates, we want you to pass a GEO bond, which is paid for by property taxes. Is that right?
It could be paid by rates, though, if there was.
But John and Libby said it could be a revenue bond the revenue could pay for it.
That's right.
And again, I think what you're hearing, John, and maybe I'm just speaking for myself, is you need to get out front with the bond and say, sell it on, this is why we need to borrow 10 million, 12 million, whatever it is, to fix the system.
And if they, okay.
I think it actually feeds in, John, to our next slide,
Okay.
which is there's the other city. Thank you, Craig, for coming very much.
Thank you, Craig.
Great input, yeah. The part where the city, John, do you want to explain?
Sure.
That?
I also want to just harken back to the last slide, just for a quick minute.
Okay.
Because the way we framed that question about revoking the charter amendment, it was if that was an option, would you all favor that option? I don't know if it is. I mean,
Well, we're just
I don't know
getting-
if it is an option. I mean,
Sure it is.
Well,
it is
You
to
voted
us,
it in, you
but
can vote it
what we've
out.
heard from the
I mean,
commission.
Whether it
I
passes.
know, but if it's, maybe, thank you for making me go back to this, because in summary of this is, if these are the only things the city commission is going to consider, then this is the input from this committee. But their advice, or their other, what they said is, you're considering these, but if it was up to this group of people what to do, then we would say revoke the charter amendment that has the cap, and in turn get oversight. If you go back here, get accountability through a public vote for an infrastructure bond, and we're calling that a GO bond. But if the charter amendment was eliminated, that GO bond could be paid back by revenue, because you wouldn't anymore have a limit on the rates. People's approval would be for the project and the amount of money it cost you to do the project. And I think, is that
the ultimate
summarized?
accountability.
Yeah.
And honestly, I mean, well, that's why I asked to get that information, because it may not be a good idea.
Right.
I mean, it may be ridiculous to even consider it, but if we don't have the information and we're not being upfront with them, that's why I asked for that data. So.
Right. And it kind of leads right into the charter amendment that limits the city's ability to borrow money, which John will explain.
Yeah, and so one of the things I've tried to do here is capture some of the pros and cons of voting on revenue bond debt, because, and obviously if there were no charter amendment, there would not be this requirement that you vote yay or nay on revenue bond issues. The pros for voting on revenue bonds, and this would apply to GO bonds as well, except those are statutorily, you have to vote on those. But you allow voters to exercise control over financing of capital projects and capital decisions. Having a vote on a revenue bond issue promotes education and outreach. You have to teach people what the projects are about and the financing plan. Projects that are supported by the community are the ones that move forward, and if you can't convince them that they're needed, they don't. Can I go through the cons too, or do you want to do that? Okay. The cons to voting on revenue bonds, it obviously limits the flexibility of the city to meet immediate capital needs and do what's necessary to get needed projects financed. If you get a no vote on potentially an important project, what that essentially does is require you to, let's say you have to do the project, that means you're funding it out of rate money over a couple of years. That project might serve people for the next 40 or 50 years, and one of the advantages of financing is it spreads the cost over a period of time that is more consistent with how people will benefit from that improvement. It's not just serving people for the 2 or 3 years that they'd be paying for it. And so what happens if you get a no vote, you're basically saying, we're going to pay for that now if you're going to do the project. And the people who are future users of the system get a free ride on paying for that project. Public votes add time and cost and energy. And this is more about the ceiling when you have a rate ceiling in place, it impacts your credit rating because the bond market is less inclined to grant you good terms on revenue bonds if they know that you can't raise rates as needed to meet all your obligations and repay that debt. So if you have that ceiling in place, you'll find higher cost or perhaps an inability to issue debt.
But if we took let's say we saw a bond, or we were able to determine that a bond that let's just use $20 million. If we or say $50 million, we got a $50 million bond, and that would, the return or the cost to the ratepayer would be 4% over what they're paying today. 4%. Well, then we could feasibly limit it to no more than 5%. And still make our rate payments, still make the bond payments rather.
Yes.
Have our infrastructure now and have it fixed, and we'd be a lot better off and accountability wise anyway.
When you go to the rating agencies to get your bond rated, and they decide what interest rate you're going to pay and rate your bonds, they look. They'll look at the next few years and they'll say, okay, you have the money now to repay the debt, but they're looking out over the full 20 years, and it's really important to them that you have the ability and the willingness to raise rates if other needs came up that could erode your ability to repay the debt. They're going to downgrade you if you don't have that flexibility.
Right.
So yeah, it might work on paper, but they're still gonna look at your ability to raise rates as needed. But GO bonds don't come with that requirement. A voted general obligation bond, because it's backed by taxes, they don't even look at the you could pledge the rate revenue, but they don't care if you're not going to be able to pay it off fully with rates because they have the backstop of the property taxes.
And there's an example of a utility that did that recently, 3 years ago. Oak Lodge Sanitary District funded a $45 million wastewater treatment plant expansion project. They went to a vote of the people, and their loan is a GO-backed revenue bond. I'm saying that wrong because I'm a public involvement. It's called a double-barreled bond. So people voted. They said, yes, I want this treatment plant, and I'm going to put my property up as collateral against the loan that's going to be paid for by revenue bonds. And there's all kinds of good things that came from that, including you'd have to say the words, but they didn't have to have a reserve, and they didn't have to. So the
terms are a lot better.
Lenders like that a lot because it's very secure type of loan, but it's not just a revenue bond or just a GO bond. Right, John? That's a double barrel bond.
It is. It's technically a GO bond, but yeah, it's double barrel.
Yeah. So I guess what we were talking here, it sounds like you guys are on the pro side of voting on money for projects, and kind of the details of what kind that is we're not going to be able to get into that tonight because it's another thing. But John?
So get rid of the charter. Is the understanding on your part that once you clear that, it would be before the city commission to go ahead and do the responsible thing to continue with a rate increase at a reasonable rate, 3%, whatever seems community appropriate, to continue to see those kind of rate increases happen, to help. Maybe they're GO bonds, maybe they're the double barrel bonds, but to help us kind of cover those costs. If the bond isn't successful, okay, so the charter amendments, let's say that's successful, we get rid of that, and out of that, hopefully there's a strong commitment by the same group that's selling the idea of the charter rollback is also kind of talking about this GO bond. I don't know exactly how that'd play out, but talking about that. If that effort is not successful, okay, what message does that have for you? Does that say that the community doesn't value that system and doesn't want to invest in it? Or does that say, well, since that didn't pass, because we don't have a limitation on rates, that the city has the authority at this point to raise rates, and that's an acceptable solution?
Well, to me, that's the fear that'll be out there about the amendment being revoked. Is they tried to pass a bond, it went down, so they'll just raise it 12%, and we're screwed. What I see the obligation to be is to then go back out and educate people, just like they did year after year with the fire station and the schools and all that, and just look, here's an example of 3 things that failed that we might have been able to recover had the bond passed 2 years ago, and here's the graph getting worse because we didn't act 2 years ago, and maybe the rate would go up from, instead of 3%, it would go up 4% because there's 2 or 3 critical things that just have to get done. I mean, a failing pump station needs new pumps, and they want to have $1 million in the emergency fund for water breakages, and there's only 100,000. But it wouldn't be, let's hit it for 7% and just ignore it. We'll just compensate for the lack of bond by increasing it. I think that would then create another charter amendment.
Well,
You screwed us, everybody's been recalled, and here's a 2% charter amendment, and you talk to us every year or else. So that, and I understand that's the fear from your side, is that a perception of that happening creates even more chaos. But that's everybody's job, especially the 5 people that sit here, but the Planning Commission, the neighborhood associations, everybody being on board and saying, we need to tell people this is, you like that you turn it on and you can drink from the tap, and
Well, I think for me it goes back to what we had discussed
Number 5.
earlier is, number 5 is important, and number 2 is important, and the way that this group sees is some relief from the restrictions on the rate increases, but still some accountability by voters saying that they like these projects and want to fund the projects, and then the rates are driven. And then also on the other side is just the uncertainty, all the cons there still kind of are in place because there's still uncertainty about community getting together to vote to increase rates. So I hear both sides. Is there any other comments? Your best advice to the city council? We can just do you guys one at a time. Kim.
So I guess, in looking at your, and not that I don't think that the citizens of Oregon City, need to be engaged and involved in this process and have a right to vote on bonds and how to spend money, but when you look at your preliminary survey results and the fact that 85% of the people didn't know there were problems, I think that it's a really heavy burden of educating the public, and which should be happening. But I worry a little bit about putting the city in that position where if you went the course of the 8% or the 5%, at least you'd have some certainty over the next 10 years of being able to fund things. And, I know the city of Westland's a pretty good example of, not being able to raise rates, and they are now like project by project, to build a $2 million reservoir, having to go back out to their public and say, please let us build this one thing, and then we'll be back next year to ask for more. And, that puts a pretty heavy staff burden to have to go back unless you're
inefficient.
Yeah, so I worry a little bit about that unless you guys, when you talk about some kind of bond of like packaging everything together and say we're going for $75,000 and let's do everything, which I don't think is probably the case. So is this something to kind of weigh, especially when you see that people don't understand the need?
What were you thinking about on the bond?
Well, my thought, in the perfect world, and if we had the time, that we would go sell the bond concept first, and if the bond failed, then go to Plan B, and then put a cap on it, and say, well, the bond failed, so here's what we have to do to be able to make this work. But we're running out of time, so we may not be able to do that. You know, and again, maybe the bond's not a good idea. I mean, I don't know. I need to look at the numbers. This is the first thing we've even brought it up tonight. So I don't have the facts. I don't have the numbers. It may not be. It may
It's a
not
concept.
be. Yeah, it may not be reasonable. And so that's something that I think we just have to have the facts so we can talk about it some more.
So Kim, you're more in one of these arenas because of the certainty that it would bring for the next.
I think it just
10.
provides a longer term. I mean, ideally, the 8% provides you that certainty, but actually fixes the problem too. You know, if it may be not what the city's willing to do over the next 10 years, and maybe 5% is kind of where you end up, but at least that assures you that something can get accomplished where unless you're going for a big bond that does everything, you're going to end up having to piecemeal it. You know, economies change, emergencies happen, you know, voters maybe vote for something one year and the next year you go back and nothing happens. So it just puts more unpredictability, I think, into it.
Great.
I guess my question would be whether you do the 5% or the 8% cap with a charter amendment in place. After 2023, are we in the same place again? Talking about needing to raise more money? Are we going to be behind again?
Well, at the 8%, we wouldn't be behind. Right. It would be more a case of, why are you guys able to raise 8% when you have a surplus in the water fund?
But did we think about this in 1996?
No.
Were we in this position?
And I don't think the 8%, the 8% is suggested as a maximum,
Yeah, it's
just like
just
the
a
3% is suggested as a maximum. So at 2023, we're not saying 8% until 2023 and then 3% at 2023. But we're, based on the numbers that we know today, we're thinking it would be, we would at that point have caught up. You know,
Would have caught
by
up.
2023, you know, we're probably going to be looking at a new master plan again and re-looking at these numbers. And
then
wouldn't
we'll
it be
have to
great
do it
if we would
again.
see something less than?
Well, you
what
wouldn't
we
have to
were
do it again because it would
The charter would be gone, right?
I guess my point is if the charter is still in place, then we're
at
still
8%.
we're still tying the hands of the city commission to do what it needs to do in order to continue to have facilities operating.
Wouldn't that 8%, John, stay in place through the long term?
Well, the way we modeled it through 2023, but the city would look at the needs at that time, and if it only needed 3% or 0%, it would certainly have that ability. I think, without knowing the system intimately, but knowing what's in the master plan, I think it's unlikely that with this kind of flexibility to go up to the 8%, that there would be needs to do much more than that. I mean, that we would get to a place in 2023 unless regulations change substantially. I mean, you would be replacing the system, you would be taking care of the major needs that are in the water master plan. So I think it's unlikely that you'd come back and say, hey, we need a 20%er now.
So just in summary, because I want to check too, is there another meeting that starts here? Okay, so we're going to have to wrap up, but I think in summary, the 8% cap kind of solves the problem for a long time,
Well,
so to speak,
and I
just from
guess-
what you know now.
I guess my issue with having any sort of charter amendment is, I remember when inflation was 14 and 15%.
I get that.
8% ain't going to do a dang bit of good. You got to go out and change the charter again.
That's what
One
I
thing
And it's in my lifetime.
One thing I have to do real quick here is, did anybody come to this meeting to have some public comment? Because that's on our agenda. Is there anybody here for that?
Just be told.
No. Okay. Thank you very much, and thank you for your time. It was very helpful. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.